Good morning and welcome. This is another roundtable edition of Denton's Smart Cities and Connected Communities think tank. And our topic today is navigating water scarcity, the energy water nexus. Our goal is to provide strategies for more resilient infrastructure. We're honored to again co-host our session today with the Keystone Policy Center as part of their Key Conversations program. And my name is Clint Vince. I chair the U.S. Energy Practice and also co-chair our Global Transportation and Infrastructure sector. And together with my teammate Emma Hand, we co-chair this think tank. Our think tank has grown to more than 850 members in nearly 90 countries. And we're going to start with a warm welcome by Christine Scanlon, the wonderful CEO of the Keystone Policy Center.
Thank you, Clint, and I really appreciate everything that Dentons does to put these incredible webinars on. They're so informative, and if folks haven't ever looked at the library catalog of all of these, you could get a PhD in energy issues and topics with the knowledge and information that Dentons has put forward. So we're really honored to be a part of this. And what a timely topic. Keystone has an energy board that has met for the better part of 40 years. And this is of keen interest to our board. And we're actually going to be talking about this in our upcoming meeting in February in Boulder, Colorado. We're headquartered in Colorado, and there's probably no issue more important than water in our state and in the West. And we've worked on many, many water issues. And the nexus with energy is such an important topic. And I applaud Dentons for being leading the way with such timely discussions. So, Clint, thank you. Appreciate you. And what an esteemed panel. You always assemble just the best and the brightest, and the conversations are amazing. So I really look forward to this one today. So thank you.
Thank you, Christine. Just in our discussion before going live, it was riveting. So I'm fastening my seatbelt too. And we're going to now have Jennifer Morrissey, who is our resident genius and colleague in our energy practice, give an overview of our program today, and then introduce Damien.
Yes, thank you, Clint. I am really excited about this topic in particular. It's an issue that has been near and dear to my heart for my entire career, and growing up as a California native, grappling with water issues for my entire life. First of all, let me say I am the editor-in-chief of the Denton Smart Cities and Connected Communities think tank. And if anyone is interested in participating in the think tank, I invite you to reach out to us. We would be happy to share ways to get involved. But for today, I am delighted to introduce Damien Georgino. If anybody is not familiar with him, but looks him up on our website or on his LinkedIn page, he is known as the water transactions lawyer. The being part of the title, like those of you from Ohio, the Ohio State University or the Edge or the Hague. He's an incredibly impressive individual with deep expertise in financing and investment in all kinds of infrastructure, but special expertise in water and wastewater. He sits on numerous boards. He was part of the President's National Infrastructure Advisory Council. He also is very skilled at breaking down extremely technical concepts into terms that a variety of people with a variety of backgrounds can all understand, so that we can have a coherent discussion about these very important issues. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Damien to introduce the panelists and get the discussion going.
Thank you, Jennifer.
And thank you, Clint and Jennifer. Let me start because I do have a little bit of housekeeping to take care of. Remember, if you want to ask a question, put it in the Q&A block. Don't put it in the chat. We can answer them at the end. I'm going to try to keep this very complex subject to the hour and a half that we have. If we end up early, that's great. But with the group that we have amassed here, it'll be hard to keep it under that. But please put your questions you might have in the Q&A and not in the chat. So today's topic is going to be about water. Now, what is water? And we'll talk about what it is and what it is not. Water scarcity, aging infrastructure, digital transformation are not future risks anymore. They are current operating reality for not only utilities, but also for industry. Today, our panelists will explore how integrated planning and public-private collaboration being the key word, can drive practical near-term solutions. The headline, before I get into the introductions, is that our global water cycle is really off balance, and there's a mismatch between perceptions, reality, where water is, where water isn't. But the headline is there is a systemic risk, and in risk, there is opportunity for investment, there is opportunity for advancement. I think you're going to find that water is going to become the most significant investment theme in the immediate near future. So, just by way of background, again, Clint, thank you very much, and Jennifer, I've been a deal junkie in water for 30 years, public, private, capital markets transactions, M&A, as well as capital formation. Um, I've been served as a partner in large law firms representing clients. I've been in management on public companies and private companies, and I've also been an investor. As was mentioned earlier, I was on the President's National Infrastructure Advisory Council, and the work that we did 2 years ago, I think was pretty good in outlining what the issues are. So with that, I'll move to the other panelists with me today. First, we have Reese Tisdale, and this is the order we're going to be presenting. Reese is President and CEO of Bluefield Research. Um, Bluefield has done a great job in the space explaining those complex areas. That his experiences in industry research, strategic advisory, business strategies across water, power, and energy sectors. Reese enjoys a lot of popularity, and in particular with some podcasts that he hosts, along with Dentons, that explore some really critical issues. He's been quoted as an expert in a number of journals. We also have Rich Razgaitis, uh, affectionately known as Raz. And I love Raz because not only is he a visionary in the water space, he's a founder of a company called Flow Water, which I found Flow Water. He'll explain what Flow Water is. But interestingly, as we all take our views on water from where we are, where we sit in age, demographic, location, Rich is taking a different step and going in to teach children about water and get them to think about water before they get tainted by anything else. He's an author of a book, so I find it fascinating, a children's book on the subject. We also have Alicia Douglas. Alicia is the founder of Water Rising Institute and the visionary behind Water House, which is a global platform designed to mobilize capital, convene family offices, and accelerate investment in sustainable water infrastructure. Alicia just was at Davos last week at WEF with the Waterhouse Roundtable. She's in just leaving Dakar today, and you'll find her view on investing, family offices, and where philanthropy plays in the program. And last but not certainly least is Alexander Loukopoulos. Alex is a partner at Signs Capital. Um, Signs is an asset manager that has made several investments over the last better than a dozen years in the water space. I find uh, Alex's insight and his unique ability to pull investments for critical infrastructure, but also designed to address a lot of the issues in the water space. Refreshing. He came up with the idea along with Columbia University for something called Rethinking Water, which happens every September in New York City at Columbia University, where they explore different aspects of the water industry and investing in water and the needs for investment in water. If you haven't been to a Rethinking Water conference, I would encourage you to look to attend. It has grown exponentially since Alex first started in 2019. I've been there ever since, and Dentons is a proud sponsor and will continue to be a proud sponsor. Alex also interestingly hosts and he'll correct me if I'm wrong on this, a water course at Georgetown, his alma mater. And it's fascinating to see how we can get younger folks to look at water differently. So, with that background, I'm going to give you a little bit of kind of a high level of what is the water sector. As I said, I've been in it for a long time now, and I see a very positive inflection point in water where it's not just become something that was never defined as a sector, but is now becoming an investable area for a lot of people up and down the right side of the balance sheet, up and down the tenor side of things, whether you're a long-term investor, maybe a family office, or whether you're even a short-term investor such as a VC fund. You're finding a lot of investment activity in this space. Water is a unique substance. Obviously, without water, you can't have life itself. Without water, you can't have energy. Without energy, you can't have water. And without both of those, you can't have economic development. So water serves a unique place in our economy. Yet people really don't understand and appreciate how you get water, what water does. The water sector has been estimated to be um, over $1 trillion, growing at triple GDP rates. Because of that size, that TAM and growth rate, um, and add to it the fact that there is no substitute for water. There is no synthetic or non-natural substitute for water, but it is a fixed supply. There's never been more water on the face of the earth since time began. We all learned the water cycle. The problem with water is that it's not always where you need it. 40% of the US population lives on the coast. That's not where most of the water is. It's not easy to relocate water because it weighs 8.3 pounds per gallon. 75% of the cost of moving water is in energy. When you look at treatment systems, particularly municipal systems, upwards of 40% of the cost of manufacturing that water is in energy. And when you look overall at the delivery of water, you can't, for example, move it between states like you can with energy. Um, we have the Great Lakes in the United States. That has the bulk of all fresh water in the world, yet it doesn't do anybody any good other than the people around that state, around those waters. So that's globally when you look at it. The solutions are going to be developed over time. The value of water will be better understood as a local issue, but how we get clean water delivered to people, municipalities, which is what most people think about it. But more significantly, when you look at water as an essential raw material in every industry, some more so than others. Every industry requires water, and water is now, it is certainly it is the beginning of resilience, but water is now being looked at as a critical um, aspect of your manufacturing process. 25% of the cost, the capital cost for a chip manufacturing plant is in creating some of the cleanest water on the face of the earth, yet some of the most complex wastes on the back end. What you're seeing now develop is a concept of distributed energy, or excuse me, distributed water, which is not unlike distributed energy. We want to make that water locally, we want to clean that water locally, and we want to recycle, recirc, reuse that water. And it's really coming in vogue throughout industry and throughout municipalities. There's somewhat of an instinctual revulsion to that, but as a municipal water drinker, but the technologies are there to make it completely safe. From a manufacturing standpoint, that recycle, recirc, reuse is something that's gaining, not unlike distributed energy, because you can control one of your costs. You can control a raw material input, which has led to a lot of industry in particular moving to different types of strategies around water. For example, um, a chip manufacturing plant says that, I make chips, I don't make water, I don't clean water. A lot of places are outsourcing, industry are outsourcing their treatment systems to third parties. Enter the world of infrastructure. Infrastructure investors generally like having a great creditworthy counterpart, as well as having a long-term contract with that creditworthy counterpart. Their business is hiring O&M companies to operate, design, manufacture, own and operate those outsourced businesses or those outsourced expenses. For a data center, right now we're looking at data centers as huge users of waters. They've always been large volume users of water, but it's really right now getting a central focus, both outsourcing the water, but also the direct use of water, but also the indirect use of water through energy generation. And just a couple of bits of information. We see water as a headline news. We don't understand it as a systemic use or a systemic issue. But there are crises around the world concerning water. But those crises shouldn't drive a lot of the policy. It's unfortunate, certainly, but we need to address these at a base level. Water's local. Things change over time. We were talking earlier about, California had historically been in a drought. California is no longer in a drought. I just saw that it was announced they're no longer in a drought. So water, there's no more water on the face of the earth, but it moves around the planet, and we just have to be aware of that. The water investment opportunity is in the trillions of dollars. I've seen 7 trillion, I've seen 11 trillion. Um, the issue is the size is so large that no one person, no one entity, no one country can do this on their own. It requires collaboration among investors, municipalities, industry, as well as policy that will direct and take advantage of that. Data centers is always a big topic in water. The information that's coming out now is that by the year 2030, with the anticipated online, and these estimates vary widely, but the daily use of water, which is used for cooling the data centers, and this is just the direct use, will be 1.5 trillion gallons per day. Trillion. And that's just the direct use. If you take in the indirect use from energy generation, the number is significantly higher. When you look at infrastructure, um, the American Society of Civil Engineers gave the U.S. water system, water infrastructure, a D minus. It was the worst of all infrastructure in the United States. A major leak occurs in the U.S. Every 1 minute of every day, 24/7. Um, you also have some very interesting views on water. As I said, I was on the National Infrastructure Advisory Council. If you look at the various constituents, you've got a spectrum of issues that go into that. And it all comes down really to investing in water and where you want to be in that spectrum. We've heard a lot lately about forever chemicals, PFOS, AFFF. There are a lot of really cool technologies that are coming out with respect to addressing that. We need the investments to follow that. With that, I'm going to stop spewing all this data. If you're interested in learning more, please reach out to me or anyone of the panelists for that matter, and we can go into detail about what the issues are, how you can finance those, and what might be some solutions. I'm going to start with Reese. Um, who's been a good friend for a while. He's been in the space. And Reese, how did you first get in the water sector? Your background is not necessarily hardcore water. So how did you get in water space?
Ooh, that's th so one, Damon, thanks for including me, and thanks for to Denton's and the and Keystone Policy group to have me on this. So it's great to be here. And after that intro and all the details, I'm not sure what value I'm going to add to the conversation, but truth be told, I will. How did I get into it? Well, I mean, around I've followed a winding path, right? I've studied geology and forestry, and then I was worked internationally in the Peace Corps in El Salvador for 3 years following college. And I mean, if there's a origin story in brief, I lived in a place where there was a 1 inch water line that went probably 2 miles, maybe 3 miles down the road from a tank at the top of the hill from the Pan American Highway. And I lived in a adobe house with a light bulb and a concrete floor. That was the best I could do. And I had a cistern, but I was at the end of the line. And when the water flowed once, maybe twice a week, I would always stand there in anticipation of filling my cistern with water. But since I was at the end of the line, I never received it. So I went to the community and said, hey, it's post Civil War, so this is 1993, 94. We can go to USAID, we can go to other NGOs, whether it be out of the US or Europe, and we can rebuild this. There's money available. We can rebuild the system. So I worked with another agency, NGO, to bring in a whole plan to rebuild this water system. And we did it. And except for the fact when we came to final presentation and sign off, everybody in El Salvador and the community and the village said, wait a second, we're going to get water bills? It was like, yeah, well, that's how it works. It's also just accountability to the system and sort of commitment to the system. It's not, you know, there's no free lunch, so to speak. And they turned it down. And so they were willing to live with partial, if not water supply. Was it the best plan? Perhaps, perhaps not. But the bottom line is that was an experience that I had at an early age, and I sort of wound my way. I've worked in the energy, so I've worked cleaning up oil and gas facilities post MTBE, sort of policy shifts for the energy space, working for companies like Sunoco and Exxon and Chevron as a consultant. And then I went to business school and ultimately got into renewable energy in the decade, I guess the 2000s, 2010 in that boom. And the fundamental shift was my company was basically acquired, and they said, "Do you have anything that's interesting?" And they were really focused on energy. And what I thought was really, and we had basically proposed to them, said, we should build a water practice because they were talking about hydraulic fracturing and how much water hydraulic fracturing uses. We said, this is perfect. There's perfect alignment here. It's going to use a lot of water. This is 2010. And so the shale gale was only just beginning at the time. And they were like, is there any, I don't know. They just wouldn't commit to it. And I thought it was really interesting. I think the energy sector, the power sector, this sort of, as we would call the nexus for particularly on this call, and water, those three things come together. It's really fascinating. And so by 2012, we had formulated sort of our idea, and we left a couple of us to go our own way, and we formed Bluefield Research. So all we do now is focus on water, wastewater, stormwater, municipal, industrial, US, and global. All bring different challenges, and but what I would say in a challenge is an opportunity. And I think that's really what it's all about. And so we've been at this since the beginning, since 2013 now. And that's how I got here, and a longer spiel than I
Well, I
expected.
really, I really do enjoy. I read every article that you publish. I listen to your podcast. I think you've got some really good insights into the space. Just getting back to the American Society of Civil Engineers. If you zoom out across the drinking water, wastewater, and stormwater systems, what's the biggest systemic fragility holding communities back? And what should cross-sector leaders prioritize first? Reliability, compliance, affordability, or resilience? That's
Well,
a
I
good
think it's
question.
shifted over time, obviously. I mean, the ASCE, I think, the report cards they put out for water, wastewater, stormwater. Stormwater is relatively new, and that's a tell in and of itself, that there's so much interest in stormwater and the size of that market. They, as you mentioned, I think in your opening remarks, that all three of those, they receive terrible, grades, report card grades.
E
Uh,
minus.
yeah, D minus across the board. And they are engineers, right? So I mean, they're going to find problems in pretty much everything. So I do look at it and but recognize where they're coming from. At the same time, it also pinpoints the benefits that we have, the luxuries that we have had, right? All of this infrastructure that's been, most of it is post World War II, right? Or even, and then there's post World War II, and then you get to Clean Water Act, Safe Drinking Water Act, and there's just this boom of spending, both at a state level and federal spending. And the challenge now has become that, so of 1978, if I believe, the federal government was providing about, I think it was 16% of the funds were going to for the water sector was coming from the federal government. Now it's down to 4%, and it's declined ever since then. So even with IIJA and ARRA post Great Recession, those dollars pale in comparison to what we were
Yeah,
doing in the
well,
70s.
in all fairness, when you have a bill that provides 1.9 trillion for infrastructure,
Yeah,
and the bit of the sector that received the least amount was water,
yeah.
at what, 70 billion, something like that?
55 new
55.
dollars. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I wrote a nasty article about it. So, but that's really telling of where policy people, where their heads are.
Yeah, no, I think that's the case. And I think to your point about ASCE, I think, when you get to what scares people is increasingly, and I think this is, I struggle with, how much is this my own perspective being in the industry since 2012, 2013, to how much is being realized, at least in the field, as I would say, by companies and practitioners in the water sector, and that is, you know, the climate issues are real, right? The larger storm events, more frequent storm events are real. And stormwater, as a result, is, it's forecasted to be $300 billion dollars over the next, I think 5 to 7 years, right? So that's real money. We're talking $300 billion dollars just for stormwater. And guess what? No one's in charge of stormwater.
Yeah.
Water systems, someone's in charge of the pipes and the plants. Someone's in charge of the or collection systems for wastewater. Stormwater, it crosses counties, it crosses waters, and in some cases, even gets to commercial properties.
Well,
So it's,
it's
yeah,
and we have more and more impervious surface, which means we're going to be collecting more and more stormwater runoff.
100%,
So
100%.
let me shift just real quick here. Industrial water demand.
Hmm.
Um, we oftentimes think of water as point of use, human consumption,
Yeah.
but industrial water uses by volume a multiple of what municipal water uses. And you have policy issues with municipal water funding, both water, potable water as well as wastewater. Yet corporations are able to make um, quicker decisions and finance a lot of it on their own with the advent of infra funds, maybe collaborating with some of those infra funds. Um, how are you looking at the industrial water systems?
Yeah, I think, industrial water use is significant. I mean, obviously, we'll just set aside agriculture, right, as
Yeah,
an
which
aside. I
is
mean,
by
that's a
volume the
whole
largest. Yeah.
whole different animal in many respects. What is interesting is to see one, it's fragmented in and of itself. I mean, every facility is a little bit different. They have local needs, they have different operators. So, rarely is it all top down from the headquarters or the boardroom to say we're going to do exactly this at every facility. But what is interesting now today is, and I think it's, the power sector has been is the lar is a, in a always been a significant user because of coal and thermal power, and then natural gas, to some extent nuclear. But what's ended up happening now and is that there's a real shift happening, right? The U.S. economy, in many respects, or global economy for that matter, is so focused on things like AI and data centers. And so as a result, power demand could, in fact, double over the next 5 years, right? And so with that, it's creating a bit of a shock to the system in industrial water demand that is sort of rolling out across all industries. Not only is power prices going up, as you mentioned, energy use for water, wastewater utilities will go up because the power costs are more expensive, the energy costs are more expensive. And as a result, and then the hydraulic fracturers in the US, producing now the largest producer of natural gas and oil, it's a $28 billion a year business moving water in the seven basins of the US, moving oil and gas.
And
You know,
just to put a fine point on it, a lot of people say that it's the water that you put in that you get out. Actually, there's something called the water cut in every onshore, offshore,
yeah,
conventional, unconventional, where, for example, in the Permian, it's something like what, 8 barrels of water for every barrel
exactly.
of oil that you
Yeah,
get, something like that.
exactly. So I think, what's interesting, and I'd say when we look at the industrial segment, industrial companies and firms, they're going to do what they have to do. They're not going to, particularly if there's an operational risk, if they're, if it's going to insulate them from drought or flood or whatever the water related issue may be, they're going to do it. Or they may just move. They could also move sites. The municipality doesn't have that option, even though they may be interconnected in many respects. And so there is this dance of stakeholder engagement or connectivity is increasingly acute, that I think, I don't want to say it's been overlooked historically, but I think because of these more these events,
Mhm.
droughts, like as we started with Christine at the beginning, talking about,
Yeah.
Colorado and Colorado River Compact. So we were talking on the side.
I think
The,
also when
yeah,
you talk about droughts and manufacturing, I think it's no coincidence that when we had the chip shortage,
yeah,
supply chain issues, 60% of the chips come from Taiwan. Right during the COVID crisis and the supply chain issues that everyone had with chips, Taiwan was in the middle of a 60-year drought.
yeah. They were
They just didn't have
trucking
water.
water to the facilities,
Yeah,
in some
yeah.
cases.
So
Yeah, and so there's a real operational risk, that we can learn from, and I think
yeah.
there are
And that's why
alternative. Yeah,
businesses are focused on it, quite honestly, Reese,
right.
right?
Yeah,
It's become a an absolute need. It's something that they can do on site like energy. And if they have the capital for it, it makes a lot of sense. And they're outsourcing it too, right?
yeah,
It's not so much anymore that it used to be several decades ago, I wanted to own and operate everything inside my fence.
right.
That's no longer the case. I'm not an expert in water. I'm going to outsource it to somebody
Right.
else.
I mean, as Warren Buffett says, he doesn't deliver his children. He goes to a doctor to help with that. So, with that being said, I mean, yeah, outsourcing is, water as a service, if you will, or other terms for that. Outsourcing is real. It's happening. It is hard to scale in some cases, um, but I would say fundamentally, technology is not the problem. It's technology, it's abundant, whether it be from the startups to the well-established players and companies. Really, it's a source of funding, policy, regulatory environment plays a critical role in all of that. So,
Yeah.
for
Well, you've got,
industrial and municipal.
yeah, and we have to talk briefly about data centers.
I mean,
Um,
why I mean, it's Tuesday. Why wouldn't we? Everybody.
yeah. I mean, it used to be we talked about fracking back in the days.
Yeah,
We talked about forever chemicals, and now the headline is data centers.
right. I think, it is interesting to see. I think, sort of tying things together. as I was sort of alluding to, is like you have data centers, a spike in energy demand, a spike in water demand in the local environments. That drives up the power demand, and then the power demand needs natural gas in many cases. If it's not sourced from renewables, it drives up fracking, right? And it just sort of, it's this whole connected, it's a daisy chain of sorts. And what we're looking at Bluefield is, we've done the deep dive into the on-site data center environment. We're about to release a report imminently on looking at the power side of the equation. And when you combine the two, on-site, so collectively, when you look at water demand for data centers, the on-site demand at each facility is only about 28% of the total, right? And they're doing different things. They're going to liquid cooling or air cooling, and it's going to take time for that segment on-site facilities to evolve technologically to more efficient water systems and solutions. The power side represents 72%, right? So any move that the on-site data center players or operators make in terms of water management solutions and technology, things like reuse and different types of treatment for their cooling towers, it has a collateral impact on the power sector as well. And so that's driving things like for coal plants that were going to be deferred, some are staying online now. I mean, are we in a nuclear renaissance? Potentially. It will take time, 10
Mm.
plus years probably. So data centers are definitely the topic du jour. And I would say, where are the opportunities? Is it on site? Is it at the municipality? Because 97% of data centers rely on the municipal utility for the water supplies.
Right.
And then the third part or opportunity related to this would be at the power supplier side. What are the power players doing? So it's, it could be all
Well,
three depending on who you are.
yeah, we,
With
we,
this
we
one.
do a lot with economic development of data centers. And
Right.
it used to be that, oh yeah, I can get my water from the municipality. And now the first question you ask is, do I have water? Do I have it? Can I get it? So Reese, we could go on forever.
I know.
Moving on to Raz. Raz, you and I go way back. Raz is the CEO and founder of a company called Flow Water. And Raz, could you talk a little bit about Flow Water and how you got into Flow Water?
Sure, Damien, good seeing you. Thanks for having me on the panel. My name is Rich Razgadis. Again, I go by Raz, and I'll tell you a little bit about Flow Water. What we do is uh, we're focused on the restoration of America's drinking water, and we're doing that by changing the last 5 feet of water line anywhere consumers work, rest, and play. And so I'll backdrop perhaps a little later with other questions around what we view and what I view as kind of a fundamental crisis in the United States, right here in our backyard with clean drinking water. But the way that we do this is that we deploy these 6 foot tall, like mini bottling plants, in effect, that dispense ultra purified water that have gone through a full RO process, remineralized, finished with the coconut carbon filter, which consumers end up in blind taste tests preferring to their favorite bottle of water. And as a result, we're delivering clean drinking water out of any municipal tap water line, primarily into hotels, schools, gyms, corporations. And the behavior change is dramatic. When we deploy a flow water unit, we'll see a 2 to 5 fold increase in daily hydration, even if they had access, whatever constituent that is, had access to clean drinking water in the form, clean kind of drinking water in the form of a single-use plastic water bottle or a water fountain or a water cooler. And we'll see a 50% reduction in sugar carbonated caffeinated drinks as well. So that's Flow Water. How I got into this. Oh,
And
go ahead.
I think Raz, interesting to note that isn't there something like 37% of the US population is chronically dehydrated?
It times two. So it's
Times
actually
two.
75% of Americans are chronically dehydrated. And actually, I'm going to share quickly about the map of what happens and then just answer your other question about how I got into this. The problem that we have in the United States is that in kind of the first quadrant, the vast majority of Americans don't like or don't trust their drinking water. So we don't have a problem in the United States called if I could only find a faucet. Like that's generally not the problem in much of the developed world. The problem is that the vast majority of Americans don't like or don't trust what's coming out of that faucet. And that is in part due to all these incumbent hardware providers, water coolers, 5-gallon jugs, water fountains that effectively do not much more than transport existing municipal drinking water into a refillable bottle or a cup or a glass or whatever it is. So therefore, consumers don't, and people and Americans, and a lot of this data applies to much of the globe, they actually won't drink it, and they reach for alternative kind of second quadrant, sugary, carbonated, caffeinated drinks, or single-use plastic water bottles, or they just don't drink water. And that's why 70% of Americans are chronically dehydrated. That stat actually applies globally as well. So it's about 70% of Americans globally, includes children. So it's a big issue in the United States. And so what got me into this, by background, I started my career in Fortune 500 pharma, biotech companies, worked in corporate marketing, and then kind of gradually started to make my way from kind of late stream interventions to more health and wellness oriented companies. And so ran half a dozen different companies over the years, a couple in tech, a couple in consumer packaged goods. But what prompted me with Flow Water was seeing my daughters, and they were around 11 and 12 at the time, 10 and 11 at the time, actually. And I was going to a soccer game, watching them play soccer, and they didn't want to drink water. They didn't want to drink the water that I brought to them out of the tap because that was disgusting. They didn't want to drink out of a single-use plastic water bottle because like that was bad for the environment. But somehow kind of felt very natural for them to drink sugar carbonated caffeinated drink wrapped in plastic or in a can. And I really kind of identified that this is just programming that's happening to kids across the United States, which is like you go to a soccer game, you did good, you get a Coke, you win a game, you score a goal, you get a treat, a snack, and all of these things are interrelated to even chronic dehydration. One of the biggest problems with chronic dehydration is that it results in sugar and food cravings. And so this is one of the reasons why, water is a satiety measure, but one of the reasons that we have an obesity epidemic in the United States today is because people are chronically dehydrated. I mean, we like to think about and point to all these other things, but the precursor to it ends up really starting with water because that satisfies a number of variety of things. And so that's really, for me, this is a mission on how do we restore drinking water and trust and taste into the household of Americans, and then again globally as well. That'll be a kind of later stage focus of ours. And so to date, where we are with Flowwater, co-founded the company 13 years ago. To date, we have saved 1.3 billion bottles from oceans, lakes, rivers, and landfills. That means there have been 1.3 billion fills of flow water into refillable vessels that are primarily put in hotels, schools, gyms, corporations. We don't yet have a consumer product that goes into households, but that's on the roadmap over the next couple, 3 years.
Well, I'll tell you, you hit it on the head. I tend to be a water snob. I do like the taste of water. And if I'm somewhere where some of the branded names that people use all the time, I just don't like the taste. They taste stale. But more significantly, there's a huge carbon footprint. If you bring water from a spring in France to the U.S., that's a huge carbon
Yeah.
footprint. But I'm with you. I like the taste of water, and I drink more of it when I'm around water that I like. One of the things that I think you're right about as well is people really don't have a lot of trust in their drinking water. We think that every drop of water that comes out of a POTW in the U.S. has to be clean to drink, has to be treated to clean drinking water standards. Every drop of it. Yet whenever it comes to your system, it may be less than clean drinking water standards.
Yeah.
Whether that's
Yeah,
because
it's a
yeah,
huge
go ahead.
issue. It's
Yeah,
actually, well, can I just jump right into that?
sure,
Because
sure, sure,
I think
sure.
is so 70-80% of Americans don't trust drinking water in the United States. Therefore, they don't do it. Why do they not trust it? Why do they not like it? Part of it is taste, depending on where you are, TDS levels. Places like Phoenix, Arizona, you might have TDS 600-700 parts per million. Places San Francisco, undetectable in terms of the taste buds is like right around 100-110 parts per billion. If it's pulling out a Hetch Hetchy, you go down to San Jose, it's like 300 parts per billion. You can start to taste that. So there's things like TDS, chlorine, other byproducts that end up in our drinking water that cause that. I think the fundamental issue that we have is and this might not be a very popular opinion for this group, but I'm going to just say my perspective anyway, and maybe try to convince you otherwise. I think one of the biggest problems that we have is that we've been trying to convince people for years that the drinking water in the United States is clean. And I think that is an absolute fallacy. And the data shows that that's not the case. And I'll give you a couple of examples as to why that is. It is when you only look at the subset of contaminants, viruses, bacteria, heavy metals that are covered by the Safe Drinking Water Act. That's true. It's generally really reliable with that. The problem with that premise is that the Safe Drinking Water Act covers fewer than 100 known contaminants. Yet in the United States today, this is also true in Europe, there are about 50,000 contaminants that are used in the United States that make their way into our water system. And I'll just give you a couple of examples of that. 150 to 200 million Americans are drinking water with PFAS in it. Over the last 5 years, 56% of Americans have been drinking water with lead in it, and this includes kids. Still to this day, 50 years have gone by. We've had numerous Republican and Democratic presidents and different controls of Congress. And yet here to this day, there's still not any federal mandate on lead testing in schools. So that's kind of left to local city and state municipalities. And that's a tragedy. American Academy of Pediatrics says the only acceptable amount of lead in drinking water is 0 parts per billion. That is the only safe dose of lead. It's 0. It's not 3. It's not 5. It's not the step down from like 9, 7, 3 over the next, decade or so. And so, we have a variety of issues that are really rooted in policy, regulatory infrastructure. And the last comment I'll make on this, and then Damien, I'll let you ask some more questions on this. But last comment I'll make is even if the water was starting as absolutely pristine, it gets dirty by the time it gets to your point of dispense. And part of that is, I would advocate, yes, you need to have chlorine in it for the sanitary transportation of that water on pipes. But we've got such aged infrastructure. And you mentioned at the start of this, there's a water line break. Did you say every minute?
Mm-hmm. Major.
Yeah, every minute. So, this is where contaminants leach into the water. But by the time it gets to you, because of such aged infrastructure and sediment load, as well as just simply putting chlorine in it, it's a little bit like, the metaphor that I sometimes use is you could if you're a meat eater, you could cook in the kitchen the most beautiful pristine steak that is grown and or raised in like volcanic virgin soil, and it's fed the cleanest feed. But if you're dragging that steak, you spray a little bit of chlorine on it, you just drag it across the floor to put it on the dining room table, it becomes inedible. And that's kind of one of the issues that we have in the United States is partly we have an infrastructure issue, but then partly we also have a regulatory and a policy issue, which is in the deregulation of allowing all of these chemicals to be in use in the United States without the proper solidification or improvement in the Safe Drinking Water Act in the United States, which has hardly been updated since 1974. Well, we have a crisis confidence with clean drinking water for very good reason. It's partly a problem that I think sometimes industry has propagated by trying to just convince people, well, the drinking water is clean. Drinking water is not clean, but people don't believe it's clean. So even if it were clean, we have an issue to solve for on that. But it's not just a perception issue. It's a very real issue rooted in data and rooted in the chemical cocktail that we're drinking in the United States today.
And therein lies an opportunity for investment in technology, which you've solved or solving at the point of use level. But let me move on, Raz. We can go on forever again to Alicia Douglas. Alicia, as I mentioned, has the founder of Water Wise Institute, as well as recently hosting the Waterhouse Roundtable at WEF. Alicia, WEF came out with their water infrastructure playbook. They said there's a 7.5 trillion euro funding gap. How is Waterhouse and WaterWise structured to address a lot of those issues?
No, thanks, Damien. So just for context, Water Rising was actually birthed out of the Flint, Michigan water crisis and in Davos at the World Economic Forum, not the Water Environment Federation, because a lot of people are like, oh, WEF, yeah. based in DC, everybody knows that WEF. But the other WEF, we hosted our 75th roundtable, which we host these non-disclosed roundtables that are Chatham House rules. And the first one that we hosted was actually in Flint, Michigan in 2016. And when you look at the all of the things and all the data that showed with Flint, it came back down to a finance issue. It all came back down to investment and also the value of water. And unfortunately, as Raz said and Reese said, that we're also dealing with children with now lead and now adults that will continue on for generations. That stuff just doesn't go away. And so why we brought everybody together at the World Economic Forum and why we launched Waterhouse was that we really saw a direct pathway forward on how we could look at family offices and how we could be able to see them as a potential opportunity for private-public partnerships because family offices own a vast amount of real estate on both city as well as rural. They're dealing also with a lot of issues such as water rights. And when they go to sell those properties, they definitely want to structure those, deals when they sell that property with those water rights and to be able to protect them. And with our principal who supported the launch of Waterhouse, this was one of the main things that she experienced when they had gone through, selling of a local piece of land that they had, in Montana was it wasn't just about like the water rights, but the fact that she saw that there was an opportunity to really start investing in technologies that could also help in real time and to also see with as we like to call it, protecting reservoirs and water sourcing, and the fact that there was a lack of technology that was securing that safety of that water. And so that really allowed us to be able to come in and say, let's create a side initiative that would be called Waterhouse and be able to start having these conversations with family offices. And this past week, we actually, in total, there was close to 70 billion worth of net assets that we had conversations with over the week. And that just wasn't from the United States. That was also in Europe. That was the UK. That was the Middle East. That was in India. And one of the common things that they kept saying was that they want to be able to see on how they can protect their assets, number one. Number two is that if they were looking at financing, they could potentially go up to 8 to 10 years. But then we also need political will on tax incentives for them to be able to do that. And so those were all things that we talked about. And in the United States, we know that politically it is an issue. There's no governor, there's no local mayor that's willing to go forward and say, we're going to need to replace the infrastructure, but yet we need to raise rates at the same time. So we really think that the family offices could help, support that until, and maybe with some other corporations. So the data centers we've been also looking at, because when it comes into zoning, planning commission, those all start at those local levels. And those decisions can actually be made within those concessions at that early stage of getting those developments. And how could we ask them in that to support upgrading those water infrastructures within those land developments? So
You
that's
know,
where those conversations went.
yeah, no, it's fascinating too. We talk about the value of water. And we all know that the value of water for an individual is based on locality. You know, if you're in a dry area, it's going to have when you start shutting down systems where you come into, day zero, like Cape Town and some other places, the value of water pops up and becomes more visible. But for financing, you need something more than just a hope that you can raise the money and increase rates. Yet when you look at rates, individual rates, most people, not most, but a large part of the population really doesn't know what they pay for water. Or more
Yeah.
correctly stated, they pay less for water than they do for subscriber services that they have in their system, in their streaming system.
Well, it's funny that you're saying this because one of the things that they did not realize that they're only paying to service their water. They were like, "What? Wait a minute, we're only just paying to clean it and move it." That was a big aha moment for a lot of these family offices, even from a global perspective. So they're like, "We're not building in any form of infrastructure to replace." And we're like, "Nope."
Well, it's fascinating how people view water. I should turn on the faucet and get my water versus that realization that what it takes to deliver that water. I think, like I said, businesses oftentimes get that. If they're paying for it, if they're looking at resiliency or they're looking at ESG, then they start getting it. They can do it on their own. And that's why I think we're moving to this model for business to a distributed water model.
No, exactly. And I think it's really important too, is that we've got a lot of education to do on how we're able to translate capital insights, into policy ready frameworks and connecting those deployable, technologies for them to be able to get into this opportunity, to invest in infrastructure. So we're at ground zero and we're really looking forward to how we can start looking at de-risking that capital. And I know that, Damien, you've led a lot of these conversations from, in multiple with Denton as well, legally. So, we've got a lot of work ahead of us, but at
And
least we
well,
can.
you see around the world, the privatizations in the US used to be in vogue, and then privatizations got a bad name. And so we don't talk privatizations in the US, we talk public-private partnerships. Around the world, however, privatizations are alive and well, where privatization being private ownership of water assets, also known as affirmage, concessions, whatever you want to use. And they work well oftentimes. But we don't talk about that much in the US. We call them public-private partnerships. Now, that means public investment, generally speaking. When you
Exactly.
look at things, um, which of those same upgrades deliver the fastest ROI for communities, investors, utilities? As you look at it, what do you find to be most remarkable in that area?
Yeah, so you know what? I think visibility, and control, knowing of like where that water is going. We talked about the amount of water that we're losing, under the ground, due to leaks, and we happen to have uh, a very high level net worth individual in oil in Texas. And I asked him, I said, so question, if you were losing anywhere, and I went on the conservative side about the amount of water that we're losing. But I said, so if you were losing between 15% of that oil, in the ground, he goes, ma'am, there'd be no way that I'd be losing that much oil. That would be billions of dollars. And I go, well, we're losing that much in water. And he goes, well, you guys need to refix this model because, that and even he said that. He's like, because that's wasteful. And I was like, but that's where we're at.
Well,
So
I had a conversation a while ago with a very large Middle Eastern, older Middle Eastern city where they were rather embarrassed to say that they had 54% non-revenue water. Every drop of water that goes out has the potential to generate revenue, but they were losing 54% of that water. And they were saying, well, how do I pay for these upgrades? Well, the answer is you capture the immunity water that's lost. And
yeah, no,
that's
and
true
I
in the
think
US too, because
that
you
is.
mentioned Flint.
No,
New,
that
I,
is true. But I also think too is that utilities for these family offices to start coming in, they also need to demonstrate more efficiency, in these models. And that's the other area that we need to really start looking at from a policy perspective. We also need governors. And this year, we're going to be electing 36 either new governors or they're up for reelection. And water needs to be on this ballot for election. And we need to be looking at governors that are supporting water infrastructure, right, in their home states because they're responsible for it.
Hmm.
And that's one thing that I think that from a policy perspective, if we can start doing that, family offices may be more willing to come in and look at tax incentives, but we need the political will to be able to do that moving
Yeah.
forward.
Yeah. Well, we're looking in the U.S. We've started a lot of states have fair value acts that move it away from traditional capital deployed rate structures into something more um, realistic, I guess, is a way of looking at it. So let me do
Yeah,
this. Alicia, we could talk all day about the policy
yeah,
aspects.
no,
I'm going to move on to Alex Loukopoulos, Alexander Loukopoulos. I call him Alex. Alex has been in the space now. He's been an asset manager for quite some time. He's got some very interesting views as an investor on where the water market is, how to invest in the water market. He teaches a class at Georgetown, as I mentioned earlier, and is very involved in a lot of forward thinking as far as an asset manager is concerned in looking at water. So, Alex, welcome.
Well, thank you. Can I just say it's pretty apropos that I go at the end here because every morning I wake up, I get Reese's emails and I read all about the market of water, which sort of informs me. I come to the office, I'm dehydrated because I've been walking through the streets of Manhattan here, and I go to my kitchen here and I drink some flow water from Raz, which is the purest, cleanest water you can get here in New York, and this is New York City. And then I open up the sort of the newspaper and I hear all about what Alicia's doing with all the celebrities raising awareness in Davos and whatnot. So it's pretty apropos that you put me here at the end after this. That's literally was my day today, and I think that highlights sort of the water sector in general, right? Is the investor comes in after he's done his research, after he's hydrated, after he sort of goes away from all the various noise that's going out there in the world and get things done. And I think there is, as you pointed out in your intro, there is no better time to do that in water. And you have to collectively put the various pieces together to actually make it happen, right? Because you pointed it out really eloquently, is that it is massively understudied, under-researched, undermanaged. The list goes on and on. But at the same time, it's massively confusing, right? And I think the biggest problem that we have here, and everyone addressed it in their own way, is that you got to simplify it. And investors is no different, right? They for the longest time have been alerted to water, but have been super confused by water. And I think the only way to really do that is to answer your question is you have to sort of rethink it and simplify it. And I think the people that have been in the sector for a long time, across the board, right, can't rethink it and can't simplify it because they're stuck in sort of the same conundrum over and over again, right? You've seen it, you've experienced it, and I think that's where we are right now. Again, is really to take the knowledge and the information that is out, is just remarkable, right? About how water is everywhere but nowhere. Utilize the focus of what entrepreneurs like Raz are doing and the ethos and the passion that they have in water, because frankly, you can't do that in many other sectors, right? I don't think you can wake up and know you're doing great for your kids and for everyone else's kids and then go write a children's book about it, right? You're not going to do that in the data center world. You're not going to do that in fintech, right? You're not going to do that, making soda and cola, right? You're going to do that in the water space. And also, you're not going to assemble some of the world's greatest minds in financial capital in 1 week that are pledging and talking about $70 billion in any other sector but water. So, look, I'm excited about all this. Hopefully that sort of answers your question. Not
Yeah,
sure,
yeah,
but I was
let's just
an
talk a little
hour.
bit.
That's what I had to say.
Yeah, let's just talk a little bit about LPs because a lot of uh, LPs, limited partners in funds, your funds included, I suspect, all are screaming to get folks invested in water. Put me in water. I need to be in water.
Yeah.
That can mean, it's $1 trillion space, but it's alpha to omega, right? It starts with water as a natural resource and ends with point of use, with the bulk of it being in the middle around industrial primarily, including data centers, including all that sort of stuff, energy. Um, when you think about that, there are different risk profiles, there are different return profiles. When you started looking at this, because I know you've been an asset manager for a while, when you came into this space, how many ever years ago, and said, I want to be in water, where did you decide to go in and what were your reasons as far as returns and
Yeah,
profiles?
that's a great question. So we came in here about 10 years ago, having done various different assets and looking at various different asset classes. So the first thing we recognized that we wanted to be in water for the macro reasons, right? And then we were lower middle market, right? So we recognize that we're not going to be deploying billions. So that de facto led us to sort of, again, the lower middle market. So what we first started out was what we don't want to be in, right? That was the first thing, right? So what we didn't want to be in, and I think you mentioned this at the top, is on the technology side, because we felt that curve and deployment curve was just way too long, right? Investors were not willing to wait 20 years for technical adoption. And secondly, we also felt that the technology was there. And so we immediately eliminated sort of climate tech, which was obviously something that was very popular about 10 years ago, but I think we let other people go that route. The second thing we decided we were not was on the complete opposite side, which was on the water rights side, right? A lot of talk about water rights. I need to own the asset. I need to own the lakes. People, billionaires putting money into sort of buying up water rights. We felt that was could work, right? But didn't really have any impact, right? Somebody wins, somebody loses when sort of the water rights come to fruition, and also the timeline was really off. So we being sort of lower middle market private investors that needed to show real returns in a real timeline focused on the middle part of it, right? Which is the real private equity piece. And within that, we focused on something very specific, right? Really specific issues. The first one was the fragmentation that exists in the US, right? 80,000 water utilities. Reese, puts out lots of reports about this. He's been frustrated about it for nearly a decade. We said somebody's got to solve it, right? Why us? Well, because we had the entrepreneurial sort of wherewithal and had the knowledge to go do it, and we went and did it. And we started rolling up one utility, two utilities, three utilities, and now we're the sixth largest private water utility through one of our portfolio businesses called Central States Water Resources, and managed to have tremendous amount of impact doing that. So what we did was remained really singularly focused in the middle market and focused on one specific problem, which was fragmentation, and went all in on it and sort of didn't lose track of it. So I think, to answer.
And Alex, just to put it in perspective, just for the audience, how many water systems are out there right now in the U.S.? Just in the U.S.
Well, it's according to sort of the best information we could get by sort of tackling and blocking every state agency and every, it's between 80 and 100,000 water
Right.
and wastewater. Nobody
And by
really
the way,
knows.
when I got into this business a while ago, that's what it was back then.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, now it's 1,000 less because we rolled up 1,000 of them, right?
that's probably true. Yeah.
So you can take 1,000 off, but maybe 1,000 people have drilled more wells down in Texas and Florida and I don't know, Colorado. I don't know, Raz. How many more people have been drilling there? I don't know. So yeah, but the reality is there's a lot of wood to chop. And you need a lot more than what I just mentioned because it's astounding, right? And I don't know if there's any people internationally here, but I wonder, people know how many water systems exist in the UK, right? Maybe 17, 18. How many
Yep.
exist in Switzerland? Not that many, right? They're all owned by the cantons, and there's not that many cantons, right? And Germany has a little bit more, but the U.S., for many things we've done right in infrastructure, the fragmentation in the water utility market is certainly not something that we should be proud of.
Yeah, I heard this when we were doing the NAIC. A lot of mayors don't want to give up their water systems simply because they're profit makers. and go back 20 plus years when Orange County ran into a problem, the way that it was solved. And there's a chapter in a book on this that by another Greek fellow, Chris Varelis, that talks about how they moved the water system under Orange County to support them coming out of bankruptcy. And Orange County remains, a very profitable water or cash rich enterprise. So they are good, profitable businesses. They just they need investment, they need technology, and they need to have a different motive than being the first place that you hire that you move into when you are hired in the Department of Public Works, and then
Yeah.
leave 3 weeks later because you don't want to be in the sewer plant. So, Alex, just talk about the role of technology in how you're looking at investments in the water space in particular, and historical technology development, and where you see the role, for example, of AI or
Yeah.
AI/ML or intelligent systems, whatever you want to call it.
So look, the world is moving rapidly across the board on technology, and we're looking at and absorbing all these technologies, whether they're sort of on the water side, on the treatment side, on the sensoring side. The list goes on, right? You have to be aware of the technology, you have to understand it, but then you also have to understand the adoption of that technology and accelerate that adoption of that technology by knowing the assets, by understanding the assets, but and by being an asset owner, right? Which is also by being the sixth largest water utility, we think of ourselves as an asset owner, plus in various other portfolio companies. So you really always need to figure out a way to truncate that technology adoption because the water sector has a lot of amazing things, right? But its adoption of new technologies on the utility side and even on the industrial side, because it is such a critical sort of commodity, it cannot happen super quickly, right? You're not going to have the massive hockey stick adoptions that you have in other sectors. You just need to be aware of that and play it more for the long game, which is why I think sort of early stage tech is just much more challenging unless you're going to take a 10, 20, 30-year time horizon, or unless you figure out a way to truncate that adoption. But things are happening really quickly in technology. I mean, and you talked about AI, right? I mean, that's it's a given, right? That you're using AI, right? Into things. It's a given you're using sensors, and you just need to make it simple for the utility owners or for the industrial sort of sustainability officer, for the regulator. You just need to simplify. And technology obviously simplifies that. But you need to figure out the ways in order to simplify it as best and as easiest as possible. And that's where you see the massive wins because there's all these pockets of the massive pockets of inefficiency across the board.
Well, when you look at, kind of differentiating or looking at municipal systems versus industrial systems, and you talk about the role of technology. Industrial, it's kind of, you have a CIO, you have plant managers, you have environmental managers, you have all that can evaluate technologies that come in, and they can look at water differently and can evaluate water differently. When you go to a municipality that says every drop, I'm required by law that every drinking water or every drop of drinking water that exits the plant has to be at drinking water standards, or there are issues. A lot of them don't have the access to technology that or technology analysis, if you will, that industry has. Do you see that as part of the issue as you look at this? And again, maybe it's consolidation that's the issue, but a lot of folks don't even have an IT staff.
Yeah. Well, that's why you can't be selling technology to people that are either have no control or have no money or have no wherewithal to make that decision, right? So that's why you have to focus the technology into the industrial sector. And even within the industrial sector, you need to focus it on specific niches within, and by niches, I mean multi-billion dollar niches, right? Within the industrial sector, or as we all know, not every water system in America is municipal, right? Focus on the non-municipals that have the CIO, that have the technology, that have been consolidated, and that's where you'll sort of see the delta on growth. But yeah, you have to avoid those traps that are so easily, it's easy to get caught up in that and caught up in the big numbers. But when you start unpeeling the onion, yeah, no, I'm not going to go and sell it to somebody who doesn't know what, the last time they put a VHS is the last time they watched a movie. Well, you're obviously not going to sell them sensors because they're still stuck on, hey, I chose Betamax instead of VHS, so I'm really angry at technology. Well, don't do that, right? But there's a lot of people out there in the water sector that I'm exaggerating the point, but you need to go where the market is ripe for it, right? Like Raz, isn't going and he's starting and selling it to specific parts of the market that will understand his value proposition. He's not selling it across the board to people that are not corporate user. You have to be very specific. People make that mistake way too much in the water sector, but the sector is so big and wide and broad that you don't have to sort of go massive.
Well, on that, RAS is a variant of treatment in a box, if you will. You have treatment in a box in some of your portfolio companies that go to the industrial side of things. Do you see that? And there's a few other competitors, obviously, that do the treatment in a box. Um, do you see that modularization or that sort of mobility? I know we did it a long time ago and it was very profitable. Do you see that growing rapidly? And I don't want you to give away any investment secrets, but what are your thoughts on treatment in blocks?
Yeah, so the theme of decentralization
Mhm.
is huge, right? And that's I think where the lower middle market plays, right? We didn't acquire utilities that we didn't acquire and wait for the public-private partnership for the municipality of 1 million people to sort of become private. Just like we're not waiting for the big centralized plants, right? Those are serviced by a different group of people that have their own sort of nuances and risk profiles. But so yes, I think absolutely the market is going decentralized and absolutely it's growing. And that's where it should, because if you really look at the US water market and the way it is, it's a very decentralized market that needs to be sort of pushed forward with these solutions that can be implemented sort of at a smaller scale, but at a broader scale at the same time. So yeah, and I hope other people listening, maybe, I would certainly focus on decentralization.
Well, thank you. And I do have 10 minutes that I've tried to save here for some Q&A, or maybe we can start with the panelists if they have any uh, further things they want to say before we get to the Q&A that I may have missed.
One thing I think Alex's point about the fragmentation, but also just the workforce within utilities. There's an
Mhm.
AWWA number, American Water Works Association, that put a number a while back. 85% of utilities in the US have less than 3 employees, right? And so that kind of gives you an idea. Like there's a 418 very large municipal water utilities in the US, and then a very long tail of some publicly owned, community owned, but also just private, if you will, systems that, I mean, I think that kind of aligns with Alex's point where you're not going to go in there selling high-tech digital solutions and technologies when, they're more concerned about mowing the grass out front and just keeping the system running. So I thought that was a interesting point.
Yeah. I do think that the industrial for investors in particular, as you look around the world, the industrial side is where a lot of investors find a lot of return because, to your point, the adoption is a quicker adoption. Moving to recycle, recirc, reuse is very ESG oriented, and you're seeing a lot of folks go into that side of it for a whole host of reasons, but one of which is I can adopt it quicker. I can be an innovator. Now, the risk obviously is the technology itself. So,
Yeah, I mean, I would say to Raz's point, right? I mean, you look at PFAS, we only talk about six chemicals, change specifically, right? There are
mm,
thousands of water quality issues related to PFAS. It goes on and on, unregulated, right? Even the current
mm,
EPA is sort of dialed back from six to four. What I think is interesting is, and to your point, is that yeah, the industrial segment, the bottom line, it makes people move and move faster, right? When they're real financial decisions. Municipalities, utilities, that's not their business model, right? They're
mm.
not there to, they're trying to provide a service, deploy capital, ideally efficiently, and they're regulated, right? And that's what they're driven by, the regulations rather than the bottom line, more so,
So
should I say.
starting to receive some questions here, and please, if you do have a question, type it in the Q&A. Um, I think this is probably more to Alex and Reese. Um, as you look at investing in water, uh, entry points, how do you look at O&M operations as an entry point?
Well, one, I would say I will just briefly, I mean, I'm a big fan. I think utilities themselves, whether they're, you know, we've talked about all these stresses, aging infrastructure, requirements for capital, regulatory, water quality issues, technology, right? And so outsourcing, it's back to sort of decentralization. Well, O&M is another angle or another approach that is growing. It's not, and it can happen at very small scale, but there are key companies, some of the large global multinationals that do it, private equity backed firms that play in the space and see it as an opportunity. So O&M, um, and because these systems are old, they require more O&M, right? So for
Well,
lack of a better way to put it, there's money to be made.
yeah, I think, like I said, I think the O&M side is very attractive to a lot of folks. It's just how do you start? Because a lot of these are small systems. There are a number of platforms out there that are doing really well, that have recently traded, in fact, for some big multiples. So O&M seems to be a very attractive place to tip your toes into. It's just how do you aggregate these very disparate sides of things?
What do you think,
Um,
Alex?
Yeah.
yeah,
So it's a group. Well, look, you have CapEx and you have O&M, right? There's no doubt that both are growing exponentially, right? Including O&M. So the question is, and if I was to give somebody advice, is what not to do is wait for the deal to come to you, right? Go to these, you know, buy some tickets, get some train tickets, or drive your car and go to all these water conferences where the O&M guys are going to be, right? Drive to find out who's the best plumber in wherever you live, and perhaps he's aging out, perhaps he needs some better efficiency. Odds are pretty high he meets one of those two, he or she meets one of those two things, and start like that, right? This is, you got to tackle and block, right? This is not one where you're going to wait for AI to give you, spit out an answer for you. Go buy this. You got to go hit the road and go do it pound to pound, right?
mhm,
But there is no better time, and that is no better way to do it. If I was looking for something to do, and I had the time and sort of the gumption to go do it, I would start going, to all these conferences and finding the people that are aging out and out of their old O&M businesses one by one, and start with one, two, three. Don't, wait for the big one that's already been rolled up and spoken to by 10 other private equity firms.
right, right. Yeah, because the O&M provides a lot of stability. It provides growth. There's been some great trades in that space recently. Um, when you look at, and this is another question that pops up, when you look at tech enablement um, and consolidation trends for CSWR in particular, Alex, but maybe what you're seeing, Reese and Alicia. Um, what does the role of that tech enablement play when you're looking at roll-ups? And I guess what I'm saying is that what the question is it easier to do the roll-ups with tech enable? I mean, most of the roll-ups companies you're looking at, the add-on acquisitions that you're looking at may or may not be tech enabled. Is it easier to do the roll-ups with a tech enabled platform that you can just deploy?
You're asking me, I mean,
I mean, it's open.
yeah, I mean, obviously, absolutely has, it accelerates it if it is tech enabled, and you have to have the tech overlay across the board that expedites it. But at the end of the day, I mean, the water sector, everything is tech and nothing is tech, right? At the same time, right? So you just have to really like, know what you're talking about and go into the sort of the micro scale, whether it's an asset, whether it's a product, whether it's a service in the water sector, and just really dig yourself into it. It's not, tech is not the solution for all this stuff, but it's clearly an enabler that you need to be well educated on.
And I would say quickly value add, right? I mean, whether you're consolidating, you can use technology to connect these systems at least operationally, if not through remote monitoring and asset management. The same goes for O&M in some forms as well.
Yeah, and
Damien, we probably, oh, go ahead,
no,
Alicia.
I just wanted to finalize just one thing, and that's on national security on our water infrastructures, and also understanding the cybersecurity aspect to that. These systems are vulnerable. This is where technology can definitely come in and play, but we need the investment into these, technologies to be able to move them forward into to protecting our security in our countries.
Thank you, Alicia. Damien, phenomenal panel, great time management. And, I've tried high profile water allocations my whole career. And I would say this is the most comprehensive and insightful discussion that I've heard throughout my career. What a wonderful panel you have selected, and really innovative, thoughtful comments, and great job of moderating. Let me ask Christine to close us out.
Well, Clint, I'm just going to echo your words. Damien, amazing job. I'm so glad you also contributed to the conversation with your vast knowledge of these issues. And I'm just bedazzled by brilliance this morning here in Colorado, and I appreciate the depth of knowledge and insight that this panel gave us today, Clint. A lot to reflect on. And don't be surprised if Keystone calls you all. And I'm giving you the heads up now. I'd love to explore some of your thinking further. So thank you. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Christine. Thank you, panelists. Let me ask, on behalf of our audience, I'll just give you a major ovation. Really, really wonderful panel. Thanks to each of you.
All right,
And have a
thank
great
you.
day, everyone.
All right, cheers.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.